The Adebola mansion was a monument to aspiration, all white marble and shimmering glass. It was beautiful, but cold, a house where warmth was an expense and kindness was a weakness. Tari moved through this coldness like a whisper. For 3 years, her hands had kept the expensive polish gleaming, but her heart knew the truth. The luxury was thin, and the laughter was brittle. That morning, she found the note, a small, crumpled final notice for the electricity bill, marked overdue, disconnection imminent. Tari knew the master, Mr. Adebola, was desperate for a new contract. A power cut would be the final, public blow to his pride. Her eyes dropped to the small, worn leather pouch she kept hidden in her apron pocket. It held her 20,000 naira, her meager, hard-earned life savings, representing her sacrifice, her ticket home, the school fees she had dreamed of. To spend it was to burn her own future. But Mr. Adebola had once given her a job when no one else would. She felt the heavy weight of that forgotten kindness, and her resolve hardened. Mrs. Adebola, the madam of the house, was a woman cut from expensive silk and entitlement. Her skin was perfectly smooth, her gold jewelry heavy, and her heels clicked along the marble like a judge's gavel. She wore a permanent expression of slight distaste, viewing the help not as people, but as inconvenient shadows necessary to maintain her pristine facade. The entire staff knew that Mrs. Adebola hated any ripple of reality that threatened her expensive control. Tari returned from the bank just as the madame stormed into the living room, a fury building in her light, sharp eyes. She held the small printed receipt for the paid bill like a piece of evidence. "What is this filth? You paid my electricity bill?" Tari, who was always polite and quick to apologize, felt a terrible chill. She explained simply that she did not want the master to miss his crucial meeting, offering her small sacrifice, 20,000 naira, as if it were nothing. "Savings? How dare you? You poverty-stricken gutter rat! Who gave you permission to involve your filth in our affairs?" The word struck Tari harder than any physical blow. Filth. Her single good deed was instantly twisted into an unforgivable intrusion. The air left the room. Mrs. Adebola's hands, usually reserved for delicate teacups, grabbed Tari's arm with rough violence, dragging her toward the front door. Mr. Adebola, that spineless master of the house, watched weakly from the top of the stairs, not intervening, not speaking a single word. "You helped to disgrace me. This house is not so low that the servant's pity keeps the lights on. Get out. You are fired, and do not ever let your dirty poverty shame my home again." Tari had sacrificed her future for their pride, and for that loyalty, she was given only rejection and public shame. She walked out into the dust of the street with nothing but the clothes on her back, her heart a raw, bleeding wound. Tari found a small park bench a distance from the mansion, clutching her small nylon bag. She wept, not for the lost money, but for the profound, shocking betrayal of trust. She was completely alone. Yet as the tears streamed down her face, her small old phone rang with a strange number. She answered, her voice thick with the residue of tears. On the other end, a voice, formal, cold, utterly impersonal, identified itself. "Barrister Eze, calling regarding the estate of Mr. Bartholomew Kalu, the late tech billionaire." Tari remembered cleaning for Mr. Kalu years ago, a quiet, kind man who had never spoken more than 10 words to her. The lawyer's next sentence hung in the air, heavy and impossible. "You, Miss Uchi, are named as the sole beneficiary of his entire estate." Tari heard the words, billionaire? Sole beneficiary? But the truth refused to take root. The lawyer repeated the simple, earth-shattering fact: a controlling share in Adebola Ventures, and ownership of a vast real estate portfolio. Tari dropped the phone. It clattered on the pavement. She slowly raised her head and looked back at the towering, proud Adebola mansion. Her tear-streaked face hardened into cold, intense resolve. They had fired a maid for an act of kindness. They had awakened an investor. Her loyal heart was broken, but her future was now limitless. The revenge would not be fast. It would be financial, poetic, and utterly devastating. Tari's first few weeks were not spent shopping or celebrating. They were spent learning. Her loyal heart was now encased in the cool, sharp armor of a financier. She moved into a secluded penthouse, minimalist, silent, and entirely unlike the chaotic opulence of the Adebola home. She met with the late billionaire's lawyers, absorbing the cold calculus of corporate finance. The 20,000 naira they mocked was now enough to buy their future 100 times over. She shed the simple clothes of the maid. Her new wardrobe was tailored, the fabrics whispering authority. Her hands, once rough from soap and scrub brushes, were now soft, decorated only by a simple, powerful diamond ring, a weapon of status. But the deepest change was in her eyes. The pain of the betrayal had been refined into cold purpose. The lawyer, a man who had seen many greedy heirs, noted that Tari was different. She wasn't seeking luxury. She was seeking justice, delivered at the prime interest rate. The lawyer spoke to Tari. Miss Uche, your majority share in Adebola Ventures makes you, effectively, the owner. You can sell it, shut it down, or use it to acquire their personal assets. How do you wish to proceed with the family who employed you? Tari, her voice now calm, precise, devoid of emotion, replied, They rejected my help and shamed my loyalty. I want their business, their status, and the physical ground they stand on. I want everything they use to judge me. Start with their debt and purchase their mortgage. The Adebolas believe disaster struck like lightning, but ruin, when delivered by a billionaire, is precise and patient. It arrived not with a thunderclap, but with the quiet sound of a lawyer's fax machine. Soon Mr. Adebola received notice of financial maneuvers. Mr. Adebola, with panic building in his voice, Doris, look! The bank is calling in the loan for the company, and they rejected the extension. They said the new investors are demanding immediate repayment. Mrs. Adebola was dismissive and focused on trivial luxury. Nonsense, dear. Have another sip of wine. This is just market noise. Focus on the upcoming charity gala. Our image is everything. But the noise became a roar. Every avenue of credit dried up. The new investors, always anonymous, always efficient, rejected all pleas. The family's imported sedan was repossessed one evening while they were at dinner. The madame's diamond-studded credit cards, once weapons of power, were declined in front of society friends. The luxury was no longer thin, it was threadbare. Mrs. Adebola screaming at her husband, panic now replacing pride. You promised me this would never happen. We have nothing left, nothing but this house. The house, that marble shrine built on borrowed hope, was the final target. Tari had made one final move. Using an offshore holding company, she bought the mortgage to the Adebola mansion. She owned the foundation beneath their feet. Mrs. Adebola stood by the front door, defiant, as the sheriff and a lawyer arrived with eviction papers. Mr. Adebola is crumpled and defeated. Mrs. Adebola, you have 48 hours to vacate the premises. The house has been foreclosed by the new owner. Mrs. Adebola, now hysterical, using her pride as her final shield. This is impossible. We are the Adebolas. We built this. Who is the owner? Tell me, who is rich enough to do this? The lawyer responded, handing her a card with an anonymous company name. The owner prefers to remain private, madam. But they are very, very insistent. They were homeless. The public shame was instantaneous and total. Their beautiful clothes, their expensive furniture, all of it was being packed and moved to a tiny rented storage unit. Mrs. Adebola, the woman who had fired a maid for touching her life, was now being stripped of her own life by a hidden hand. They had no money, no status, and no prospects. But the revenge was not yet complete. Tari needed to look her tormentors in the eye and hire them. Humiliation is a thief. It steals a person's pride slowly, leaving only panic behind. For the Adebolas, the loss of their home, that symbol of their fragile status, plunged them into immediate ruin. They were desperate, calling every name in their old address book, only to find the silence of former friends was louder than any laughter they had ever shared. They had no skills, only a practiced arrogance that the cold city market would not buy. And so, driven by hunger and the chilling reality of poverty, they were forced back to the only place they knew. They stood outside their former mansion, now the pristine estate of an unknown billionaire, hoping, praying that the new owner needed help. Mr. Adebola, now defeated, spoke to the new security guard. Please, sir, my wife and I, we are professionals. We are seeking employment. We can do anything the new owner requires. The new owner, known only by the cold legal name of the investor, finally sent word. She needed a house manager and a driver. A meeting was scheduled. The Adebolas, with their last shreds of dignity wrapped tightly around them, prepared to meet their new employer. They stepped back inside their old marble entrance. The scent of polish was the same, but the power had shifted. The furniture was richer, the art more modern. In the grand living room, seated on the very sofa where Mrs. Adebola had once insulted her maids, was their new boss. Tari is seated in a power pose. She is impeccably dressed, her face calm and emotionless. The Adebolas saw a powerful, elegant woman. They saw the status, but they failed to see the soul. They were so consumed by their own shame and need that they could not possibly recognize the eyes of the maid they had cast out. The small diamond on Tari's finger shone brighter than any jewel Mrs. Adebola had ever owned. Mrs. Adebola, bowing slightly formal and desperate, said, "Madam, we are the Adebolas. We are highly skilled. I can manage the entire staff." Tari, her voice soft, slow, and precise, mimicking the madam's old tone, replied, "The Adebolas. Yes, I've heard of your management skills." Tari allowed the silence to stretch, observing their humiliation. She noted the tremor in Mrs. Adebola's hands, hands that had once thrown money and insults at her. She smiled, but it was a cold, purely corporate smile. Tari spoke. "Mr. Adebola, you will be my personal driver. Mrs. Adebola, your expertise in cleaning will be useful. You are hired as the chief domestic supervisor. You will clean the floors just as my previous supervisor did. Your wages will be deducted for any broken item. Do you accept the terms?" The Adebolas exchanged defeated, shocked glances. Mr. Adebola, voice barely audible, replied, "Yes, madam. We accept." They had become their own punishment. The woman who had sworn they would stay poor forever now commanded their servitude. The irony of their new existence was a bitter, daily meal. Mr. Adebola, the proud master, now drove Tari's black luxury sedan, waiting hours in the hot sun. Mrs. Adebola, the impeccable hostess, now scrubbed the marble floors she once criticized Tari for not shining brightly enough. The madame's old voice was replaced by a constant, aching silence. The worst torment was the house itself. Every room whispered their failure. Mrs. Adebola was scrubbing the floor right where she had screamed the word filth at Tari. Every glint of gold, every piece of expensive art was a brutal reminder of the life they had thrown away. Tari walks into the room and looks around. "Supervisor, this spot here." Tari points with her toe at an infinitesimally small smudge on the polished marble. "It is not clean enough. I will deduct from your wages if this happens again." Mrs. Adebola's knuckles turned white on the scrub brush handle. She wanted to scream, to weep, to ask why this cold woman was so cruel. But she could only lower her head and reply with the obedience she had demanded from her former maids. Mrs. Adebola, voice humble and broken, responded, "Yes, madam. My deepest apologies." Tari allowed this routine, this slow, surgical dismantling of their pride, to continue for months. She wanted the pain to sink deep into their bones, to replace the arrogance with true humility. But the time for silence was ending. The final public verdict was approaching. The final confrontation was not meant for the silence of a mansion. It was designed for the public stage. Tari arranged a grand charity gala, a spectacle of wealth and influence, held with perfect, cold irony in the ballroom of the very mansion the Adebolas had lost. The city's elite, the press, and every former associate who had shunned the Adebolas were present. Mr. and Mrs. Adebola, dressed in the humble uniforms of the domestic staff, moved through the glittering crowd, serving champagne and canapes to the people who once envied them. The torment was complete. Mrs. Adebola, the former madam, was forced to smile and offer drinks to the very women who now gossiped about her ruin. Her spirit was crushed, her pride an ugly, distant memory. She did not know that she was merely setting the stage for the final, devastating curtain call. As the night reached its peak, Tari, the investor, the silent owner, took the stage. She was a vision of power, her voice calm and commanding. She thanked the attendees, praised the generosity, and then, with a subtle shift in her tone, announced a special, unscheduled presentation. She called her two chief domestic supervisors to the stage. Mr. and Mrs. Adebola stepped onto the stage, confused and nervous, blinking under the bright lights. They looked small, humbled, and terrified. Tari stood between them, holding a small, crumpled piece of paper, the very paper that had marked her termination months ago. Tari, with a clear voice, addressed the entire room. "Ladies and gentlemen, before you are two of my finest employees, the Adebolas. They are experts in domestic supervision. I brought them here tonight because I owe them a final lesson." Tari reached out and gently touched Mrs. Adebola's cheek. The movement was slow, deliberate. As Mrs. Adebola's eyes focused on the woman who was their owner, the veil of wealth and power was finally lifted. The madam recognized the maid. A soundless gasp tore through her. Mrs. Adebola, her voice breaking, let out a horrified whisper. "Tari!" The whispers in the audience turned into a deafening roar. Tari held up the crumpled termination notice, a physical record of her humiliation. Tari, her voice cold and definitive, spoke. "Months ago, these people rejected my 20,000 naira and fired me for daring to show kindness. They told me my poverty would shame their home. They told me I was filth. Well, today they have served my guests in the home I own, working for the fortune I control. I kept them employed, not out of mercy, but so the world could witness this final, irreversible truth." Tari turned to the Adebolas, her tone final. "Mr. and Mrs. Adebola, I have no need for two servants who confuse arrogance with expertise. You are fired. Your final payment will be 20,000 naira, the exact amount you threw in my face." The silence that fell over the ballroom was heavier than any judgment. The Adebolas had lost everything: their home, their wealth, and now their last shreds of dignity. They chose greed over goodness, and in the end, the faithful maid they humiliated became the investor who stripped them bare. The lesson was clear. You must never, ever reject the hand that tries to help you, for you never know the destiny that hand holds.